Hi, I'm Santini. I run a studio called Andthen, and I want to talk to you about a kind of alternative approach to community development. So we do futures research, and our work is about helping people understand what their future could be and how they can move towards that. And we sit in this kind of space between design, futures research, and social sciences. We're particularly interested in people's interactions, people's values, and how these are changing and how these are affecting the designed world. We see the future and looking at the future not necessarily as a kind of way of visualizing a future, but actually as a way of understanding how we can change things now and how we can change the direction and the things we're making and the decisions we're making in the current day. Futures as well is not about kind of envisaging one future, it's about exploring the whole kind of mess of futures and understanding which of these futures are preferable, which of these futures are not preferable, and which of these are even possible, and starting to come and have a discussion about what the routes to these particular futures are. The reason we approach it from a design-led perspective is we feel that design is inextricably linked with the directions and the decisions we make. So design influences how we interact with things, but the way we interact with things influences how we design things. And so that's kind of the perspective we're coming from. I'm going to talk quickly about a project I did with Chris Strachan, who's somewhere around, and the University of Glasgow called Growing Tasty Futures. This was about engaging with urban growers and helping them understand what urban growing could look like in a future food network and how to get there. The workshop was based on this format that me and Chris came up with called Cultureberg, which is about kind of looking at society as an iceberg and considering, we see all these things on the tip of the iceberg, but what are the things that are happening below the water, and what kind of influences what's happening. So we start looking at this kind of level of the litany. These are like the news headlines. We're moving lower. We kind of look at who caused this, what caused this, what do these people think, and what are the kind of deep preconceptions that we have that actually inform how we even perceive things or why we make the decisions we make. The workshop goes through this format where we deconstruct current society, looking at kind of the myth and metaphor, trying to flip the myth and metaphor into kind of new subconscious preconceptions and building a whole new society with new people, with new interactions, and ultimately kind of new goings-on in this world. So we try and make this process, which can be quite dry and quite boring, engaging. We kind of get people to fill out news headlines, sensationalize what's actually going on, instead of just kind of putting down bullet points of what's happening. We say, can you think about how this might be represented if you're writing for The Sun? We then get people to write down kind of the stakeholders that are involved and map out the links between these stakeholders. And this is quite an interesting point where people kind of find that certain stakeholders don't link up. For example, farmers and consumers don't link up, and that might be a reason for why there's such a huge amount of food waste. We don't understand where the food's coming from. We then kind of get down to the myth and metaphor, and this is quite a nice kind of image of the sign saying, please keep off the grass. It's quite a good symbol of how we treat community spaces as these kind of preserved, special places that should not be used and should be not be hacked. So flipping these myths and metaphors, they start building kind of new scenarios. So we give them a load of toys, and this is quite a nice kind of stakeholder which kind of describes elderly people who have space to use and could become land lenders. I'll come back to this one in a minute, but they start to kind of link up all these different stakeholders and create new scenarios. Another is kind of the Department of Sustainability, which is the one in the middle, the idea of growing people and not money. And in this kind of world, it was about kind of in re-educating the elderly, and giving people a kind of we can fix it attitude. Going back to the land lending kind of scenario, in the end, they came up with this kind of system where elderly could kind of lend out their lands to the local community growers, that they could grow food, and in a sort of kind of, excess food could be sold back to the grid, and food could become a currency, and also kind of this would increase well-being and reduce loneliness. But the big challenge with this kind of work is actually getting people to understand how to get there. It's all very well and good to imagine a scenario, but what can they do? And so we've tried to design this kind of backcasting tool where they kind of think about the here and now, the world they're in, and how to get to the world they've designed, and what are all the kind of steps that need to be taken to get there, and what can they specifically do with their skills to get to that moment. I think this is still kind of something that needs to be worked on and developed further. So the kind of function of this kind of work is in some ways predictive. It's about understanding change, understanding why change is happening, but in kind of more interesting ways, it's about exploring, in a second, it's about kind of guiding process. So it's this idea of looking at the future, reflecting back on the now, increasing the agency of the actions we're taking, informing the decision making, and helping give us a vision of where we should move towards. And finally, we also kind of see all these ideas on the horizon, but we don't really know what they mean. We've heard of a lot of things that we know are coming in the future, but on a human perspective, what does that actually mean? So it's about exploring the interactions between people and not just looking at things from a bird's eye perspective. And so I think that's everything, but thank you. And if anyone wants to get in touch and talk about this further, please do.